love to see in the chat if you're here more for the peak performance or you're here more for deep rejuvenation, like which side of that pulsation is more calling to you right now. So we can just kick off our chat with that question. So what are you here for? Peak performance and deep rejuvenation. And don't say both. I would want to hear just if you have to choose one or the other. All right, so we've got peak performance, and peak performance. And I need a boost, which I'm going to say is maybe on the rejuvenation side, perhaps. All right, we're slowly gathering in the room here. So again, for those just showing up, I'm asking, what are you here for, peak performance or deep rejuvenation? And then I'm going to dive into what I know on the topic and how to orient from here. All right, so it looks like this is good. So more are coming from peak performance and deep rejuvenation. And I think part of that is because we've got lots of yoga health coaches here. So that's great. Awesome. That to me means that the deep rejuvenating practices of the daily habits are working for you. So really good to notice that. Okay, so for the sake of starting on time, I'm going to dive in and do a little bit of switching back and forth between some slides and some drawing on my whiteboard, which I love to do so much. I've got my handy dandy pen here. And it's good to notice what you are here for. So again, you either selected deep rejuvenation or peak performance. And what I would like you to do is take a moment and ask yourself, if I were more in my own peak performance, or if I were more deeply rejuvenated, what would have changed? So how would I know? How would I know if I had arrived? How will I know I've arrived? So what are some of the changes that I would have made that would have resulted in this experience? So you don't have to know what the changes are. You just have to know, like, how would I measure this experience? So for example, if you're choosing peak performance, as many of you are, it might simply be that you have uninterrupted focus states, that you end the day with as much energy as you start the day, which is possible. Many people don't know that. Those could be two examples of how you would know if those two things were a reality. Maybe if you didn't forget things, if you're currently forgetting things and you didn't forget or lose train of thought in conversation, that would be another example. If you're on the deep rejuvenation side, again, I'm just trying to orient us here so that this conversation that we're about to go into has meaning. So it's grounded in something that's real for you, which can be really helpful, because otherwise it can just be this intellectual exercise. And if anything, I'm not all for just having intellectual exercises, as fun as they can be. If you're on the deep rejuvenation side, how would you know you've arrived at a point that's more deeply rejuvenating? And again, we're not saying how you're going to get there right now. But how would you know if you had arrived? How would you know if you were there? So part of that might be a feeling of an energy surplus, is what I call an energy surplus, where you have enough energy to do everything that's on your plate, but you actually even have a little bit of surplus to do more. There's even a little extra. And that extra comes in really handy when the stuff hits the fan, right? When things go as unexpected, when you don't get a good night's sleep, or you have more on your plate all of a sudden, and you can actually have the bandwidth, because you're deeply rejuvenated, because you have an energy surplus, you can have the bandwidth to be like, yeah, not going to make me into a heap, right? I got this. So that would be one measure. What's your measure? And you guys can, again, you can chat in the chat window. You can let me know, and this just helps me see what's going on with you and keep the conversation relevant. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my slides, and I have a few slides on this, and just to get a little bit into who I am. For those, I know most of you know me. I can just see from the names here, but I know also a few of you don't. Yogahealer.com since 2001. I came into this web domain name, this identity, as an Ayurvedic practitioner and as a yoga teacher what I'm finding now is I'm more involved with collective leadership than anything in terms of my actual job description. And I develop evolving communities. And in these evolving communities, there's people who want to transform. They want guided experiences of transformation to be healthier in their bodies, to be also what actually happens is once you have that energy surplus, to actually lead themselves, lead their families, lead in community. So that's a little bit about me. I wrote the book, Body Thrive, which is based on the habits, the Ayurvedic habits of peak performance and deep rejuvenation in a very fundamental way. I'll talk about the innovating edge of those habits a bit today. And then I'm in the process of finishing Master of You, a 5-point system to synchronize your body, your home, and your time with your ambitions. 5 elements all over again, but very much a modern Ayurvedic perspective on peak performance. All right, so again, a little bit about me. This is a little bit about our values here at Yogahealer and Yoga Health Coaching, which are all around orienting towards thrive. So as far as I can figure out what I've been doing since I started Yogahealer, so now for going well into the 2nd decade in this, is helping people orient towards thrive, to sense what thrive is and actually adjust their day-to-day behaviors and even adjust their mindset to orient to thrive. And I could tell a little quick story this morning. I was, my daughter's almost 11, and she carries a load. Like she's definitely in the peak performance, deep rejuvenation, and she was in the deadest of dead sleep this morning and got woken up for school. She had about 10 hours of sleep. She gets at least 10 hours of sleep consistently. She's a very active gymnast and now snowboarder and many other things. And she was really, really fatigued. And she just was like, I don't want to do today. I want to go back to bed. And so we sat with that and processed that a bit in a very emotionally processing, digesting way. And then we oriented towards thrive. Like, what do you need to be thinking right now? How do you need to be breathing right now? What do you need to do next just to orient yourself towards thriving? And so this is something, again, it's in my personal life. It's very much in the growth of our course community here. And then we have a number of other values I will not get into. So what I want to do is really talk about what this is. And I'm gonna shift into my pad to talk a little bit about what I've noticed about peak performance and deep rejuvenation. And we might end up with a picture that looks a little bit like this, but I want to show you how we get here, how we get into this growth and into this depth, which is to me what peak performance and deep rejuvenation is all about. And in the meanwhile, as we go through my little presentation today, we'll talk about small improvements. This is from James Clear, The Power of Tiny Gains. We'll talk a little bit about what making small changes actually does. So as we talk about peak performance and deep rejuvenating habits, it's easy to think that it's harder than it is. And so it's important to scale back to how small a step actually needs to be taken. And there's a rule around this. This is the 2-minute rule, which states when you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do. So again, I'm going to get into habits, and I'm going to get into these big changes that we can make, or things that we can expect on a path of deep rejuvenation. And before I get into my little drawing pad, I'm going to also say that this year I offer a course that's an annual course, and we have a group starting in early February. It's called Body Thrive. Yep, same title as the book. It's about living the 10 habits. So we don't just talk about the habits, we actually live the habits. And I find it takes people about a year to optimize the habits that lead to peak performance and deep rejuvenation, to be able to build that kind of a surplus, to be able to do more with their lives, to be able to live into what the yogis call dharma, to really be able to fill another level of purpose and potential, because you have that energy surplus, because you have a deep, deep well to source your energy from. And that group starts in February. It's a live weekly coaching group session with me. We go through the 10 habits 4 times throughout the year. And it's great for anyone who really understands that being in a guided transformational journey is really the best investment, because it's all about you evolving you and who you can become next. So I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. If you have questions at the end, we can get into that. But in the meanwhile, I'm going to go into, I'm going to start drawing some pictures for us. as we talk more about peak performance and deep rejuvenation. All right. So without further ado, often we can, we might be oriented. It's like, how would you draw growth? How would you draw your own experience of peak performance and deep rejuvenation? And one of the things that I look at is there's something that in integral evolutionary theory that will draw a spiral. So we could say this is the evolutionary spiral, where each level of your own, and we'll just say your own self-growth, your own personal development, that each level, so this could be level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that each level, it transcends, meaning there's an upward lift, like that it's bigger, that you get bigger and you get broader. You become a bigger and a broader version of yourself. And that keeps happening at each level. So what we also would say is that each of these level differentials is an identity evolution, right? Same you still are you. I'm still Cate Stillman. I'm not the same Cate Stillman as I was a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago or in 2001 when I started Yogahealer. Because there's been so many levels of identity evolution. There's been so many levels of self-growth. And you can just chat in the chat and kind of let me know of what have you seen. If you look back even a few years and let each other know, even if you look back a few years, like what do you see as a measurement of that identity shift? Like how could you see, wow, I used to be a person who could do this, but now I'm a person who can do this. Now, some of you might see regression as well, right? Where you feel like, wow, I used to be able to slay dragons here, and now I've actually regressed. Now I actually have an autoimmune disorder, and I'm sick all the time, and I can't even get out of bed, and I don't even know who I am anymore. And it feels like it can feel like a regression. So I'm going to account for all of this and how I now kind of take this spiral and I flip it. If you have any questions too, in the meanwhile, just put them in the chat. Just put them in the chat window, and that can help me again just make the conversation a little bit more present and more directed exactly to you and exactly to your needs. Oops, I lost my share. Okay, so yeah, we can see disease as a regression, but it might not be too, right? Because it could be a healing evolution as well, and we can see where does that actually fit in with this. Okay, so the big idea from here, just to recap, is the idea of as you evolve, you transcend and you include who you've been before. So you always get to rely on who you've been. You always get to rely on those skills that you've developed in your becoming. Now, what we know about Western growth, if we look at how most people measure growth, is it looks something like this. So who I was, and this can be time, and this can be growth. And so if we look at peak performance, we could even say my ability to do X, right, that grew. I grew in my ability. And so over here, we could even say that this is peak performance. I'm able to perform at a higher level. Maybe I'm able to lead more people. Maybe I'm able to do a better job at this. Maybe I'm able to do bigger and bigger jobs than I could do before that. There's been an increase in our ability and in our capacity, and probably in a certain kind of knowledge. So all of this is, to me, around growth. But what happens is people can be on a growth path and cruising right along, and then all of a sudden they can hit one of those regressions. Oops, I'm going to make an effort to write legibly, which is, for me, a growing edge. Regression. So they might be progressing right along, and then they might regress. And we could see this in terms of dis-ease. Anyone who's really like trying to do more and trying to do more and trying to do more, like hitting levels of peak performance, it can be really hard because all of a sudden you realize like there's way too much on your plate. So there can just be a confusion about like how much is too much. And am I becoming exhausted? So if we just have this part, there's a bit of a risk of burnout or exhaustion. There's also a bit of a risk of information overload, stimulation overload, right? That stimulation is too high. Do you guys relate to what I'm saying? You can put in the chat window if you know what I mean. Like when you're trying to do more, what can really happen along the way? We can lose a bit of a pulsation. What I see is that there's this other part of the spiral. So if we take the same spiral and if we tip it on its side, it looks more like this. And this is what I call the growth path. And this is what I call the depth path. If we just focus on growth, we tend to burn out. And then we never hit higher levels of peak performance. And it's exhausting. And you kind of know it. You're like, I'm pushing myself. And you know that you're pushing yourself. Like from a yogic perspective, you know you're not allowing the greater energy to fuel you, but you're actually an ego. So one of the biggest risks over here is sourcing energy from ego. So I'm just going to say sourcing from ego. You guys know what I mean? When you source energy from ego, it's like, I just got to push and get this done. I'm trying to make progress here. And you might feel like you've got like 5 irons in the fire and you're just trying to manage it all, but you're getting into this overload and you feel it. And so what do? You push through the overload. And you know that push is coming from ego. This is really important. If anything I learned as an Ayurvedic, when I was like my 10 years of one-on-one being an Ayurvedic practitioner, I just had someone actually in the last call say, do you work one-on-one? Can you see me one-on-one? I was like, no, I haven't done that in years. I work with big groups now. I look for big patterns, big systemic patterns. And one of the big patterns that I see is that people don't know enough about this problem, this risk of burnout, this information overload, the system disruption that comes from excess stimulation on the path of progress. They don't know how to differentiate when they're sourcing from universal energy and when they're sourcing from ego, because it's a very subtle shift. And unless you focus in on it and start to allow yourself to receive the signals from your body, what'll happen is burnout. And burnout is anyone with an autoimmune disease can speak to this here. Burnout is very tough to recover from. It's not a quick fix. Deep exhaustion, it shows up in autoimmune disorders called chronic fatigue. It shows up in a number of different things. When we push and push and push from this place of ego and we burn out, what happens is we end up finding depth. What happens is this, and then the mythology of this is really very fascinating, and I do write about it a lot in Master View, but the mythology of what happens below here, and it's interesting because it's really in many ways below the field of time. Time gets really murky down here. And this is the depth journey. This is the healing. So this is this is what we're saying is growth on this side. And this is what we're saying is depth on this side. And that these two things are opposites. If they're not in balance, if we're not balancing this deepening of our integrity, which means the more we want to do, the more we have to source energy from the universal. Ego often lives on this side, and what lives down here is universal. In a way, if you just think of this as being watery down here, I'll just draw some water in. This is really watery down here. We all look more or less the same underwater, but above water, when we're all dried out wearing our fancy clothes, we look really different. This is coming from the universal. And time can stop and stand still. Anyone who raised their hand on the deep rejuvenation poll that we ran early in the beginning knows exactly what I mean, right? When you're in healing, what happens with healing time? Is it fast or slow? You can type it in the chat window. It's slow. Thank you. Thank you, P14. Thank you, Chantel. It's slow. Sometimes it's timeless when it says it's slow and expensive. Yeah, it's slow and expensive. It's slow and expensive. It can be really expensive. And it can be so slow, it seems timeless. So down here, we could say that this is the field of time. And then opposite, it's like this, it's very amorphous. Everything down here is super, super amorphous. It becomes very amorphous. It becomes very, very hard to measure. And it needs to, because we've gotten so far away. We've gotten so far away from the power of the universal energy, which is consciousness itself, which does the healing. So we've gotten really far away from this because we were really up here in ego. And what's interesting is we need a really healthy ego to do a lot in the world. We need a healthy ego for Dharma. And so it's not that ego's wrong and universal's right. If we're just in the universal all the time and when this is like deep, timeless space, we don't actually do things in the world. So what I find, and I told you I would be drawing pictures that would start to look like those other pictures on my slide presentation, is what happens is if we want to experience really peak performance and we want to experience deep rejuvenation so we don't burn out, what our growth path and depth path need to look like is this. That we're reaching new heights and we're plugging even deeper into universal energy. We're going even deeper into deep rejuvenation. And that when we do this, by going down, it actually gives us the lift. Root down to rise up. It's a basic principle of universal energy. Yoga teachers are very good at pointing it out. If you want to jump high, says the basketball coach, bend your knees more, stick your butt out. Get down to go up. Root to rise. Many of you know this principle, right? And the question is, what does that actually look like in your day-to-day life? Are you doing both? Or are you playing a game that's more top-heavy? You know, is most of your time and energy going into this? Are you nailing this at the expense of this? Because if you are, what that ends up in is regression. So that means that you can't handle this level of the game anymore. So consciousness is like, in your body is like, nope, go back. Sorry, that's no longer an option. So we're putting you back here because this is all you have bandwidth for. And what that does is it brings you deep into that healing journey. It brings you here. And what consciousness is saying is you need to develop this if you want that, if you want to go up again. Okay, I would like at this point to pause for any kind of questions. Type them in the chat. So anyone who has any questions, I'm going to sip my red smoothie. Cheers. I'd share with you if you were here. I just want to make sure we're actually thinking and breathing here. What ahas or what questions are coming up? It's kind of a pretty picture, isn't it? I like the color choice on that one. So nothing. Oh, wait, let me see. Yep, there's nothing in the Q&A. Okay, here we go. We see this without group members. Yeah, with our group members too. That's what Nancy's saying. It's like she's seeing this in her yoga health coaching group members. Yeah. P14 says brain work seems to be in the top and emotion seems to be in the bottom. Well, you can have a lot of emotion. I don't think it's that separate because you can have a lot of motion, like a lot of ambition. Ambition is an emotion that is going to drive peak performance. Same thing with desire and will and willpower. Any of the emotions around that are going to drive peak performance. It is a different kind of emotionality that'll drive deep rejuvenation. Often it's where there's integrity gaps, where you're coming to terms. There can be I often find here there's a ton of regret. If there's an emotion, and it's a helpful emotion. I'm not one to, I don't think there's anything wrong with regret. I think all the emotions are totally amazing. They all have purposes, and one of the purposes of regret is to say, like, what did I learn? Why did I get bounced back in terms of my capacity? Yeah, so ask P14, what are the emotions that go with ambition, and see what you can uncover in there. There can be a sense of excitement that goes with ambition. Curiosity also goes with ambition. All right, so being able to do more, being able to perform in peak performance, which may be doing more for less, being able to accomplish more with less energy, time, and attention and focus, this requires deep rejuvenation. And the more we get that, the more we get curious of like, what is deep rejuvenation? Like, what does that look like? So I'll pivot back into our slides. And before I live my handy dandy notepad here, it's worthy to note that in order to do this well, in order to rock both sides of this equation, from the research I've done and from different communities I've been in that rock this, is it basically takes being in a group that's doing it. So the group is into transformation. They're into identity evolution. What does that mean? They're into, if we just back up here, they're a group that has as a shared value, this is what we do. We go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. We become people that have increased capacity over time. And we're dedicated to that. And we know that what's going on in the world out there is disruption, right? There's just a lot of people that are actually getting bounced backwards. We can see this in terms of statistics, right? Even if you look at really smart professional communities, such as those that are in the tech world, right? There's a ton of money in the tech world, but what we're finding, right? There's a lot of money in tech. There's a lot of ability, ingenuity, innovation. All this is happening, but what's actually happening is people are getting less sleep, and they're experiencing an increase in mental disruption. And we're seeing a massive increase in immune-related and autoimmune diseases. So it's a problem, right? Like there's big, and I don't have to get into the details with all of you about it, but there's just a lot of problems with understanding that what current culture is doing is not this. Is not 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. It's not this over here. Current culture is not doing that. Current culture is regressing. So that's what we're up against. So unless we get ourselves in a group who's going 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, who knows what they're doing and knows how to do it, it's hard. And you can actually hit levels where you don't experience deeper levels of rejuvenation each year. And therefore you don't give yourself the root, right, in order to rise. You don't give yourself the deep bend in the knees, the femur bones way back and apart, right? Like it's like breaks through your own glass ceiling in terms of peak performance. But if you're in a group and that's what they're doing, you do that. You become that. And they help you digest your regret. And it is, for me personally, it's been some of the most powerful experiences I've ever had, is when you have that kind of alignment with a group to do that. All right. And so I am going to say hi again. Hi again. We're going to get into a new screen share, and I'm going to be able to show you some more slides. All right. These opposites, I'm just going to bring us into some images. This is Waves, and this is Catechus by Alex Gray. And this Catechus by Alex Gray very much parallels the chakras. He's showing the intersections, how the Catechus is really the mythological symbol of equal and opposite energies. Equal and opposite energies that do what? That root to rise. Root is the root chakra down here at the bottom of the pelvis. Rise is the crown chakra. Everything I've talked about is the same, right? It's all, we're aligning this to the human physiology. We're saying like these energies, these principles, deep rejuvenation, peak performance, they're part of who we are. They're part of everything that we know. They're part of every element of nature. I am a surfer, and therefore I study waves, not intellectually, but just physically, right? Of just being in waves. And waves they come in cycles. They come in rhythms. And waves can entrain us to a rhythm. The way that each wave of energy rises and curls over to itself, it equally regresses and pulls back on itself. It's a circular motion. And you'll see even in the catechus or in the chakras, there's this very much this circular motion. There's a concept in Ayurveda in yoga, not Ayurveda, in yoga, and it arises in the tantric writings of yoga about 900 AD to 1300 AD around Spanda. There's a famous book called the Spanda Karakas. And this is this principle of contraction and expansion. Go in deep to expand out, become nothing to become something, and then become nothing again. The wave, it crashes back on itself, right? And it dissolves back, it pulls back, and then it helps feed the force of the ocean. So in this way, like we know this, we know deep rejuvenation to peak performance. We know the opposites. We know this experience, but part of the problem is like the way that we're oriented to the body, if we come from Western culture, is not to be aware of these equal and opposite energies. We're given much more of this like nuts and bolts, this much more in the flesh, in the muscle, in the bone tissue perspective. And we can forget how to pull our energy back into deep rejuvenation. And again, unless we're in a group, unless we're in a culture that's doing so, it can be really disorienting. And it can feel really disconnected unless we're like with a group of people who are doing this, who are getting the habits, who are living the habits that align to deep rejuvenation. It's really, really easy to just get into this, something's wrong with my body, things are out of control, I'm getting really tired, I'm losing mental focus, I'm not able to complete my projects on time. And to get more in this, not understanding that ego needs to dissolve into the universal, deep rejuvenation needs to take over. So I'm going to read a few things that some different thinkers say about these things. And then I'll, again, you can post any questions or comments in the chat, and then I'll come back to the chat. Many of you know Dr. Vasant Lad. He's the author of most of the modern Ayurvedic echelon of books. I had the honor of being in his Gurukula program in 2004 in India. And he says some really profound things. And this is something this is the disease tree he's talking about here. Health is the effect of a healthy lifestyle and healthy habits. Disease is the tree sprouted from unhealthy habits. So this idea of a disease tree, the roots of the tree, and I'm not going to draw it out. Well, I might later, but right now I won't. The roots of the tree, right? The roots of the tree are habits, daily habits. And again, we're going to go back to James Clear here in terms of the power of tiny habits. The roots of the tree are micro habits that sprout disease. And it can be, in this modern day and age, it can be things that are so subtle in our levels of consciousness around hurrying, just hurrying. Hurrying, if we go back to the last growth pattern, top end of that growth curve, right? Hurrying can be an emotion of trying to progress, but not sourcing energy from universal. Super subtle, but over time can sprout a tree of disease, can sprout an autoimmune disorder, can sprout inflammation that can lead to cancer, can have massive health consequences. Let me, and what am I looking for? Hold on just a second here. Yeah, okay. Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, who's a he's a famous thinker and coach of like massive organizations and organizational growth. He says, we do not create and control our environment creates and controls us. The more we want to look at what are the deep rejuvenation habits, again, what are those micro habits that Dr. Vasant Lad's talking about? What are those little habits that actually unwind a disease tree and actually start to sprout a tree of health? It gets really interesting how that connects to the environment that we want to create. Part of this is, again, being in the right group. This is interesting from James Clear. Why remaining part of a group after achieving a goal is crucial to maintaining your habits. It's friendship and community that embed a new identity and help behaviors last over the long run. So if we create an environment in not James's book, but Benjamin Hardy's book, and I'll read a quote from Benjamin Hardy, willpower doesn't work. Benjamin Hardy argues that part of your environment that Marshall's talking about here is your relational environment. So if you're not in a relational environment of people that have the habits of deep rejuvenation, we now know deep rejuvenation is what fuels peak performance. You see where this is going? If you don't have your relational environment, meaning the people that are influencing you day in and day out, if they don't have the habits of deep rejuvenation, you're not going to hit your peak performance. And that's intense. You know, that to me, it's a bit of an intense concept. And that brings us back to Jim Rohn, who's a modern business, he was a modern business guru. He said, don't join an easy crowd. You won't grow. Go where the expectation and the demands to perform are high. Now, you could exchange, if you're in here and you're on your healing journey, you can just flip out that word perform and swap in the word heal. Don't join an easy crowd. You won't. You can also put it in for grow. You won't heal. Go where the expectation and the demands to heal are high. You guys following me? It's kind of amazing. If we see these are all different edges of thought leadership. And if we start to combine them and we start to see, like, is there a healing environment? Are there people around me? Am I surrounded by influences that are helping me go to deeper and deeper states of rejuvenation, who are helping me? Again, remember that deep rejuvenation part of the curve, that's integrity. Are there people helping me become in integrity with my body, knowing that my body is complicated? Healing is really complicated in many ways, and in other ways it can be somewhat simple. We also don't know how long healing is going to take. We already talked about that side of it, how you can have gotten yourself in really, really, really deep from being really, really out of integrity with what your body actually needs or what your mind actually needs, or not listening to your intuition, overriding that from your level of your ego. And in this kosha perspective, that's a misalignment between, or you could say it's a missed opportunity that's now arising as an opportunity to pursue, between the mental kosha, the manomaya kosha, the mental sheath, and the intuitive sheath, the vijnanamaya kosha, or the knowledge sheath. So again, if we can be in an environment of people who have a very broad perspective of what thrive looks like, who are orienting towards thrive, who are living in alignment with their own integrity, just knowing when they're out of integrity. And it's in the middle, it's the little million things. I'm going to go back to our million little things here. James Clear has this illustration, and I have his permission to use it. And this is coming from a book he recently released. And in this, he's just showing that 1% better every day equals 37% better in a year. Better what? Just a little gain, just a little improvement. What the Japanese named the word kaizen, a small continuous improvement. So you don't ditch the improvement you made yesterday, you build on it. How much? 1% equals what? 37.78% gain in a year. If you look at this in terms of sleep, what does it look if your sleep gets better 1% each day? Like, even just think tonight, like, what little thing would you need to do tonight to get a little bit of a deeper rest. So this morning with Indigo, we rehearsed what it's going to look like tonight after gymnastics practice so that she has a better day tomorrow. She'll also get to sleep in tomorrow. But what it'll look like is she comes home from the gym, it'll be 8 o'clock. She'll eat whatever she needs to eat. It'll be warm and hot so that she can sleep for about 11 hours. And that's it. It's a little gain. What's the 1% improvement that we did? We just visualized it before she went to school today. Let's rehearse how this is going to go for you and me at 8 p.m. Very small thing to do. Doesn't take much time. Setting intention into motion. Yogis have rocked at setting intention into motion for a very long time. I was trained in it. Really easy to bring up. Most of you have been trained in it. Really simple thing to do. That's a 1% improvement. The opposite side of this is what happens when, and this is so fascinating. You see that dotted line in the middle? Is what happens when you don't improve. And what's fascinating about what happens when you don't improve, when you're not doing 1% improvements, is you tend not to stay in the same place. You tend to actually regress. And the way I think about this is if I go back to these values that we have at Yogahealer and Yoga Health Coaching, these are statements of universal truth. They're not really particular at all to Yogahealer. People want to be guided into their potential. We all do. We all do. It's the nature of consciousness itself, is to explore and to be more. Now, consciousness itself isn't neutral. It's positive. Consciousness itself created self-reflected human beings, for goodness sake. And when we're in health, we experience positivity. We don't experience neutrality. So when we're in our natural state, which is health, we experience an orientation towards the positive, not towards the neutral. This is so important to realize. There's no such thing as the dotted line. What happens is regression. So negativity takes over and it's trying to plummet you. It's not because it's bad. It's just trying to plummet you back into your own integrity. That is lessons learned. In Ayurveda, that's called Prajna Parada. I'll type it in our little chat window. And I might spell it wrong because I'm a bit multitasking here. P-A-R-A-G-N-A. Prajna, the jna in that means wisdom. And Parada is that there's a failure. They even say it's a failure of the intellect. We're so far out of integrity, we're not even willing to look at our own integrity. We're not even willing to say, like, okay, here, me and Indigo this morning, okay, here, what is on your plate? Like, where can we just relax? Where can we orient towards thrive? What does this afternoon look like? What needs to happen next? And if we don't do that, and we just keep motoring on through pedal to the metal, willpower, buck up, kid, go to school, let's go, let's get out of here, right? That attitude, that's going to lead to more and more repressed emotion, A, bad parenting, B, but worse every day. And her immune system could collapse and she could forget a cold. She could get sick, right? Now, if we look at this in terms of peak performance, deep rejuvenation, and we go back more to this picture here, is what happens over time with us as adults is energy inefficiency, and we get sick. So 1% worse over the course of the year means we have set up our physiology for disease. And that's what Dr. Ladd is talking about here in terms of the roots, right, for this disease tree are growing. And they're growing so strong. When a root gets strong enough, it gets to rise, whether it's health or disease. When the disease tree root gets strong enough, it's pushing energy into a shoot. Now, the way that Ayurveda looks at allopathy in terms of disease, it says allopathy is a really hard time diagnosing the initial stages of disease. They'll even say it has a really hard time initially diagnosing the first 4 stages of disease, and it excels at diagnosing stage 5 and stage 6, manifestation and differentiation. By the time you're there, you're hard to heal. It's complex. There's been integrity gaps going on for a very, very long time. There's been stuff going on not supporting health for a really long time. There's been 1% worse every day for a really long time. And chances are there's also a group culture that hasn't had a high expectation of personal health integrity a high expectation of integrity on all 5 levels of koshas. Again, our Ayurvedic perspective. That's hard to heal. And that's where you really get into what Lynn was saying, like healing is time intensive and money intensive, right? And that can happen. We see it happening all the time. So then the question is like, what does it look like to be in a situation where everyone's helping everyone get healthier, become more in integrity, when everyone's helping everyone have habits of deep rejuvenation and peak performance? And what are some of the habits that a group might be doing together? And that's where, for what we do in Body Thrive, what we do in that group, and why it takes a year to automate the habits, it's because we often know what to do. I'll just go through, this is a list of things that I personally find very helpful for me personally. Like, this is just part of my MO, this is just part of my modus operandi, my operating system. Early to bed. So early to bed for me most nights is around 9 p.m. Early to rise. Rising time for me is around 5 a.m. Now, many of you might relate to being in patterns where, like, you have the time cut out for sleep, but the sleep doesn't happen because there's a lot of micro habits in there. There's a lot of 1% improvement for habits in there that you might not have. You might not know how to get your awareness to move from the monomaya kosha to the anandamaya kosha. And there's a skill set in there to doing that. So you may have the time carved out, but not the skill set for how to integrate. Again, the reason these habits are these particular habits are due to, there's energy cycles. So the energy before, you can see in this slide, the energy before 10 p.m. is a descending, heavy, watery, stable energy. You want your sleep to be heavy, even cloudy, stable. And you want a fluid transition from the mind, peak performance, doing, into receiving, which sleep is this receiving. To me, it's this receiving of this nectar of universal energy and universal consciousness, which reorganizes the physiology on these subtle levels. I'm used to having more dialogue than just monologue, so I don't mind as a pause, as I'm like, okay, I'd rather be talking and having, you guys need to chat more in the chat. Okay. Now, early to rise has to happen too, for the same reason that we want our awareness to be set for the day in a mind that's awake. So it's the opposite energies of kapha. These are the energies of air and ether, the energies of the force of vata, the force that expands, the force that moves consciousness. And this is where, if we want to experience peak performance, we cannot wake up after sunrise. Like, sorry, it doesn't work. Your mind's more cloudy for the day, so you're not going to have the same clarity of thinking, expansiveness of perspective. And again, if you're not in a group that's helping you have these little small 1% breakthroughs all the time, right? Chances are it's actually quite hard to do these things, to get this deeper rhythmic sleep, sleeping on a deeper level. And on sleeping on a deep level, what I aim for personally is, like, I call it blackout sleep, where it's like, I'm on, I drop in, I'm in for 8 hours, and then I'm awake. When I'm awake, I'm awake. So it's those kinds of transitions. So in our definitions, we also want to see, again, back to what Dr. Ladd's saying, is that there's little habits. Where is he? There's little tiny habits. There's these 1% habits. And the effect of these habits is health. And their effect of these little tiny lifestyle habits, these little 1% lifestyle habits. All right. Rhythmic moving. This is moving. So 20 minutes a morning, after hydrate, bowel movement, 20 minutes of movement, or if you meditation, then movement, or movement and then meditation, depending on your constitution. And then looking for opportunities throughout the day of, like, where else can I move? Can I get into rhythmic movement? Again, energies and pulsation. We're more like the waves in the ocean than we think. If we're sitting too long, it equals disease. There's phenomenal statistics, and they are insane, around 4 hours of sitting and what that does to disease. It just promotes disease like crazy. It's like the numbers are insane. It's like, and I could pull them up right now. They're in my next book, Master of You. But there's some studies in Europe that basically show like a 40% increase in autoimmune from sitting 4 hours a day. It's insane. And there's other stats that show sitting for an 8-hour workday versus standing versus walking versus mixing things up. We're humans, we're monkeys, we're meant to move. We're not meant to be human sittings, right? We're not human sittings. If you're human sitting and you're looking at you're sitting too much, just know that that equals disease. So you've got to mix it up. If you're with people who are getting more and more creative about different ways that they're moving throughout the day, again, that's going to orient you towards health. That's going to orient you towards thrive. So for me today, what I'll do after this call is I'm going to go shovel the trampoline because there's snow on it. And that itself will take me about 5-10 minutes. I will work up a sweat just shoveling off the trampoline. I'll partly do it just for the movement itself rather than for the need for the trampoline to be cleared. But then I'll probably jump on the trampoline for 10 minutes because I'll be on a trampoline and it's fun, and why not? Then I'll look for another opportunity later in the day to get more movement, which for me might look like going snow biking because I live in a winter wonderland right now. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be in Mexico, or a week from now, it's coming up. I'm going to be in Mexico, and there it'll look different because it's in a different climate, different opportunities. Last weekend, I was in San Francisco, and it looked like taking a lot of walks, standing up, throwing in some handstands and jumping jacks between some longer meetings. So the point is, you just want to look at how much am I in rhythm. The other big habit most people don't have and aren't surrounded by is rhythmic eating. And this is 2 to 3 times a day. If you're a healthy, functional adult and you want a body like this, where you have good musculature, right? It's really, most of the time it's eating twice a day. It's eating 2 meals a day. Occasionally you might need a third, or it might be fun to eat a third, but it's not snacking, it's not eating later, and it's never overeating. That leads to disease. It stretches the stomach. It starts to associate stretched stomach with the experience of pleasure. You actually want a shrunken stomach, so it's easy to experience pleasure with just the amount of food the body needs. Again, these habits can be hard to have, and you guys are, I can see, asking for some details about the particularities. That's more of what we actually do in the Body Thrive course community, so I'm not going to get into that here. It's just here is important to know, like, this is what's needed for both rejuvenation, because we now know that rejuvenation is the precursor to peak performance, and that they have to have this equal and opposite relationship. Okay, gut shots. This is fermented pickle juice, essentially. It's cabbage, fermented cabbage juice. It takes about 3 days to make. It's dirt cheap. You can Google Yogahealer gut shots, and there'll be recipes on my website, or on our website, for those that unpack a little bit more about why. Now, the reason I have that in there for deep rejuvenation is because most of us just need a healthier gut biome. Gut biome's tied to everything in terms of immunity, even in terms of sleep rhythms and a healthy endocrine system that enables not just digestion, but also sleep and immunity. So these little things that we can do, that's just my way of saying, like, this is the best, cheapest, most complex probiotic. It just happens to be really easy to make, and you can get into a habit of just taking a gut shot a day. And then my personal favorite, and again, it took me a while in this 1% improvement to get to cold showers, but I do start my day every day with a cold shower. And I often look for other opportunities to get really cold. Here, that's going to be lying in snow, which seems totally bizarre, but it's really fun when you get into it. Very stimulating. There's tons of research out there on cryotherapy, and you can Google it, you can research it, you can read Wim Hof's book. But basically, some of the best, I'm just going to type in cryotherapy, CRYO therapy. Some of the best studies on anti-inflammation have everything to do with getting cold. It stimulates circulation. It stimulates healthier norepinephrine cycles. You will sleep deeper. It's the #1 reason Americans do cryotherapy is for deeper sleep. Amazing stuff. So again, if we want to have these habits, knowing that it's a 1% improvement journey, then what happens is we start to realize we should be in a group. We should be in a group that's going there. I'm going to just show you what my group looks like for a moment or two. And then I'll stay on and answer questions, and I'll go back into just faces, and we can unmute some of you that have questions, and we can just talk more face to face. What I realized in writing Body Thrive, what I realized in writing the book and leading the course, I wrote the book after I already had a global coaching organization and people coaching the habits in the book. And then we realized it'd be easier if we had a book. So then I wrote the book. And the book's based on 10 habits. And I was teaching these 10 habits in 10 weeks. A habit a week, a habit a week, a habit a week. And it's kind of challenging, right, to adopt habits quickly. But really, we're just looking for these 1% improvements. And what happens is because we repeat that cycle 4 times a year, so 10 habits every season or quarter, and we do it iteration, 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 the habits and the culture of small improvements becomes normal. And then this bullet list, which might seem kind of intimidating in the get-go, this starts to become normal because everyone around you is doing it. This is the pot of sauerkraut. And when you're in that pot of sauerkraut, you just become the sauerkraut. And because there's infrastructure to help people along, it works. Again, if we go back to people saying that what works in terms of achieving goals, I find this is really fascinating. This is, again, Benjamin Hardy. He's a behavioral scientist, researcher. He's in a PhD. He's writing his PhD on this connection between willpower and achieving goals and environment. He says, when it comes to achieving goals, making committed decisions involves investing up front. And even just here, I interviewed him, it was James Clear, who really talks about the importance of investing up front. That's published on the Yogahealer Podcast. If you don't invest up front, you don't have skin in the game. If you don't have skin in the game, when the going gets hard, and the going gets hard in integrity gaps, it gets hard on your depth cycle. When you get bounced back, when you're not achieving, there's things to be done. There's reconciliations. And if you're not invested up front, you won't change. And if you don't change, you don't get to experience an identity evolution, and chances are you'll regress into these 1% degeneration over time. Okay, so when it comes to achieving goals, making committed decisions involves investing up front, making it public, telling other people, like, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. We do this right away in Body Thrive course. First meeting, why are you here? What do you want? And then I have everyone write their top 3 goals so that I can see them, you can see them, and we can track them. Setting a timeline. In a year from now, and I always tell people to do this, like, how do you want to feel a year from now? We did it in the very beginning of this call. How will you know when you've arrived? Now my question to you is, when do you want to arrive with those behaviors by? When do you want to experience deep rejuvenation, peak performance by? Because then you can set a timeline, and then you can start to work backwards, saying, I want to be in there a year. I want to be there a year from now. What do I need to do today to be in line with my timeline? Installing several forms of feedback and accountability. When I showed you guys this picture of our lateral, I call this the lateral mesh. This is how we grow and how we rejuvenate. This here is describing this. This is multiple forms of feedback and accountability. And I just want to break down that that's all this guy's done for the last 10 years is research this stuff of, like, as far as human behaviors, what do we know it takes to achieve goals? And this is what he's saying. Invest up front, make it public, set a timeline, install several forms of feedback and accountability. And this is my favorite one too. They're all my favorites. Remove or alter everything in your environment that opposes your commitment. So now that you're going where you want to go, how can you change your environment so that it actually pulls you forward? And again, we talked before how your environment is also your relational environment. So what do you need to change in your relational environment so that your relationships actually pull you forward into deep rejuvenation and into peak performance? All right. So that's why we do it 4 times a year. The first quarter is about getting it, just getting the habits. What are they? The second quarter is all about working it. This is where you lean in. I have higher expectations for you the second quarter, right? If you're in my group, I expect you to be working the habits now. I expect some progress to be made. I'm like, these 1% improvements, like I expect these to be kicking in. And we're more in the upward swing of the curve then. Quarter 3, this is live it. Like by now you have the momentum. The habits are carrying you. This is what a wave train's like. It's really fun when you're on the outside of a wave train because you can see them coming, you can feel them coming, and now you're just in the flow of it. And to me, that's what happens after about a half a year of being in my group. You get to live it. They become your life. It becomes easier. This checklist is no longer hard, right? It's normal. And you're getting more energy. You're getting more mental clarity, more mental focus. If you have excess weight, you're losing the weight. If you have inflammation, you're losing the inflammation. Now you're in a flow. You're in a flow state. You're living it. It's starting to take over. And then by the last quarter, you're just being it. You're just awake to the flow. At that point, you're at this 37%. You're up here. And that's a very different reality than down here at 1. And to me, that's what it's all about. So I just want to tie back to like when I say we orient towards thrive, when I say that I guide people into their potential, it's a real deal. That's what we do. This is the best way I've figured out to do that. Help people at the baseline with their habits. Once people have their habits dialed in, we can get into the master of you stuff. We can really get into ambition and we can do way more in our lifetime. And that's to me where it also really gets exciting. But I also get that we've got to start where we are. And if we don't have this checklist, if we can't just go check, 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 yep, that's all automated, then you're a good fit for Body Thrive. And what we hear from Body Thrive is this. I get this email every day, like meeting you is a life-changing experience. Why? It's not because of me. It's because of this. It's because I know how to get people into 37% year-over-year growth. That's why. And so if anyone here is listening and you want to be in Body Thrive, we're starting in a couple weeks. Go to bodythrive.com/course. You can also just get on the phone. We'll put a link. Let me find the link in the chat. My journey here, this year-long journey, it's $3,500 for the year. And that's as affordable as I can make it. I'm on the phone coaching week after week, people to evolve to get to automated habits. We have a huge support team that's right there along the way in terms of mentors and other leaders that are supporting our members. And it's awesome. And it works. To me, that's the most important thing, is that it works. And you can also go to bodythrive.com/course, and there's more information about the course and videos, etc. All right. Damn, I'm good. I'm on the hour. All right. Anyone that has questions, again, I'd love to stay for a few minutes and do any Q&A on anything that we talked about here. Great to see you all here. And I'll just look in the forum. Also, I just wanted to see too, if there's anyone on my team here. I don't know, Megan, if you want to do any Q&A from stuff you've seen in the chat, I can bring you to panelist. I'll just bring you in. There you go. Or if anyone else, and I'll just look in the chat. Yeah, you guys are welcome. I'm glad you can make it, and I'm glad it looks like we've had a lot of yoga health coaches here too. Yeah, awesome to be with you all, and just love to you all, and keep guiding into your potential. Pay a lot of attention to your potential. Namaste.